All right. So we're in the middle of Seif Chaf, and we were learning the halachos of the responsibility of a nifkad, of a person who is, or what we would call a shomer. He's been tasked with watching an item, guarding an item for a friend, keeping it for safekeeping until his friend comes back to claim it. And what we had said is that there's a difference between the submission of money to someone versus the submission of an object for safekeeping. In most instances, if someone gives you cash to keep, to watch for you, so then there's an assumption that they don't specifically want those specific uh, uh, items of money back, and therefore you can use them for your own needs. The only exception would be is if they bind the money in a specific container that's sealed, then it's clear they don't want you to open the box and use the money. But if they just give you a wad of bills and they say, "Do me a favor, I need to, I need to go on a trip and I need a place to keep this cash. Can I keep it with you?" So then you can assume that as long as you replace the money with the equivalent amount, then then you're permitted to do that. But then, so what we're up to is, he says, "Bamedvar mamurim b'ma'os." That's only true with cash. Aval b'sha'ar chafetzim v'chayotze bahem. But with other objects, afal pi shekol minhu shaveh ve'in bo hefresh klal. Even if you could argue that this item is readily available, it's a commodity that can easily be replaced. A guy leaves a sack of grain with you for safekeeping, or he leaves a widget with you for safekeeping. Any item that's even an easily replaceable commodity that is exactly equivalent if you were to buy it at the store. Nonetheless, asur lahotzio u'lashalem acher tachtav, afal pi she'ein hefresh klal bein zeh shahotzi lezeh shemishalim tachtav, k'mo b'ma'os. He says you're not allowed to take that object and use it, even if you're and consume it with the argument is I'm just going to replace it with another one from the store, and even if the replacement item is exactly the same. Lefi shekeven she'ein hadavar yadua lemafkid shahanifkad tzarich lahotzi chaytet zeh. He says, and the reason why in halacha this is true is that since the person who left it with me for safekeeping is unaware that I wish to use this item for personal use, ein kan hochacha shenisratzel lazeh, then there's no indication that he would be agreeable to my using the item. Now you could say to yourself, well, who cares whether he's agreeable or not? The answer is that is what ownership means in halacha. The fact that I own something gives me full authority to decide who will use that item and who will not use that item. We are very much encouraging in halacha and in Jewish worldview in general that a person should readily lend out his items and share of his assets, right? There's a Mishnah in Pirkei Avos that says, Shali, Shalach, V'Shalach, Shalach. What is mine is yours, and what is yours is yours. That person is a chassid. That person is very, very pious, right? But if a person says, Shali, Shali, V'Shalach, Shalach, what is mine, and what is yours, so then there's two different opinions in the Mishnah. And I just want to make sure I'm quoting the Mishnah correctly. But the two different, there are differing attitudes. If a person takes the position, just give me a second, I'll get you the exact text. Shali. Right. So it's in the 5th chapter of Pirkei Avos. Arba midot ba'adam. There are 4 different kinds of attitudes when it comes to ownership. Ha'omer shali shali v'shalach shalach. If a person says what's mine is mine and what's yours is yours, zo mida beinonit. This is average. V'yesh omrim zo midat Sodom. And some say that it's sodomite-like. So it's funny. It's the Mishnah gives us differing attitudes. If a person wishes to delineate very carefully on what is mine and what is yours. Meaning, you keep what's yours. I'm not interested in taking anything from you, but don't start coming to me to ask me to take my stuff. So some say that he's not a great tzaddik, but he's not a Russia either. He's what we would call a Beinoni. He's not interested in taking what's yours, and he's not interested in sharing what's his. He has a right to do that. There's a differing attitude that says that Zumidas Sodom. This is sodomite-like, meaning that a person who takes that attitude in life is miserly, um, and and therefore doesn't have the capacity to share. Right. So the reason why there's two differing attitudes is because it depends what he's coming to combat. You might even argue that this is a conservative or a Republican in politics. What's mine is mine, what's yours is yours. I don't believe in socialism. I believe that everyone should have rights to their own property, and don't start asking me to donate my hard-earned wages to support a welfare state. Right, so that's one attitude, right? That's a very like a right-wing political view, a conservative political view. So some say that's Mida Beinonis, because he takes that attitude not only as far as how society should be run, but as far as the way he views his own assets. But on the other hand, it could degenerate very quickly into evil if there are many needy people in our environment. It all depends on the circumstances when a political conservative insists that everyone has to take care of themselves. It really depends on what's going on in the world at the time. So, but from a halachic standpoint, every person, the Torah endows every person with rights of ownership. Now, you may say, well, there's something called Midat Sodom. What does Midat Sodom mean? To behave in a sodomite-like way. So the Gemara says that Midat Sodom is that if you have something and I need it, and you refuse to lend it to me, it's considered to be Midat Sodom for me to deprive you of the opportunity to use it because Zen Nehene V'Zelo Chaseh. Right, is that I can benefit and you won't lose out on it at all. So there is a concept in the Gemara that talks about kofen al midas Sodom, that sometimes we can compel a person to abdicate rights to certain property based on the fact that you lose nothing by it. The standard example is that if, let's say, a person has a piece of property that is abandoned, that he's not getting any benefit from, let's say just and no one's using it, and it's not meant to be rented, excuse me, to be rented out at all. So then in that kind of situation, if let's say a neighboring landowner wishes to allow his animals to graze on that property, so then there are certain instances where the Gemara says, if you're not using that property and there's no loss of income to you by allowing my animals to graze on your property, or let's say to trespass on your property, you have no right to preclude me from using your property. There are certain instances, but it's not so simple when we apply kofen al midas Sodom and ein kofen al midas Sodom. But one thing is clear when it comes to chattel property, like the example that we're saying, just because you happen to have possession of my property, but I gave it to you for safekeeping or you're holding on to it for me, doesn't automatically give you the right to say, well, he's not losing anything if I take it because I'll just easily replace it. So why shouldn't I be allowed to use it? So the Torah says no. The Torah says that when something does not belong to you and you're holding it for safekeeping, even if you're completely prepared to replace it, you are still obligated to consult with the owner before taking it and using it for yourself. And there's no sodomite behavior just because a person says, no, I happen to be particular about my possessions. It may be unbecoming of him. It may not be a menschlich thing, depending on the circumstance, but every person does reserve the rights to say who can consume my property and who cannot consume my property. Okay, and he says, sorry, I just read that. And therefore, since this is without the owner's knowledge, you are sholeach yad b'pikadon. And this is a term that the Torah uses. You are sending forth your hand to make use of an object that was left with you for safekeeping. Ki shlichus yad hamur b'Torah eina almanas ligzol bilvad. He says, when the Torah prohibits you from utilizing and from putting your hand on someone else's property for personal use, it doesn't prohibit it only if you plan to deprive that person of the property and cause them financial loss, even if your intention is to replace whatever you're using. It's still usher for you to do that. I can't just walk into your house and eat a box of cookies, even though I plan to return your cookies afterwards, right? That's still called gezela. Gezela, stealing from someone, is even if you have every intention of replacing what you took. Ella afilu almanas l'shalim tachtav, even if your intention is to replace it. Kayotze bo mamish, hoil v'hu motzi hapikadon legamre, bein kulo, bein mikzaso, hareze sholeach yad b'pikadon. And therefore, whenever a person decides to make use of a pikadon of his friend by consuming it either completely or partially, then you're guilty of shlichus yad, and you're in violation of the Torah. Now, what's more is that once the Torah assigns you the status of a gazlan, then you become responsible to replace that item, even what's ever left of that item. And if anything were to happen to that item, you would be chayav. Remember, we talked about that there are different levels of responsibility for a shomer. A person who is an unpaid guard is what we call a shomer chinam in the Torah. And the level of responsibility of a shomer chinam is minimal. He's only liable for pishia, for acts of negligence, like if he leaves the front door open and someone can just walk in, or Fluffy is left in his charge and he leaves the front door open and Fluffy runs away. So then he would be liable even if he's not being paid for his guardianship. But if he is not negligent and Fluffy gets lost out of no fault of his own, or someone breaks into his house and steals Fluffy, so then the halacha is that a shomer chinam is not liable. Now, that's only true if there was no shlichus yad, if there was no utilizing the object for his own purposes. But let's say a person was left a sack of grain, and he decided, you know what, I need some grain, and so he takes some of it for himself, and he says, I'll replace the cup of grain that I took, I'll replace it. No, once you've even taken a small amount of that sack of grain, you become liable for any mishap that occurs to that sack of grain. And even therefore, if someone were to break into your house and steal it, you would be liable for its replacement, because once you steal something, you become fully 100% liable for anything that happens. Okay. And that's in contrast with the following scenario. And that's true as soon as you just pick it up for use, right? But let's say you don't consume it, right? Because it's not a consumable item, it's just a usable item. So for example, a guy leaves a book with in your safekeeping. And remember, we said that a book is not something that you can take liberties with and start reading it for your own needs. So if you start reading the book in violation of the halacha, and there's been no loss, no wear and tear on the object at all. So ein bo mishum shlichus yad ela mishum shol shalom midas. So then in that situation, you're not liable for being sholeach yad. You do not become a gazlan, but you still are in violation of the halacha. You've borrowed an item from someone without their consent. So the difference in halacha is that if I read the book and then put it back where the guy left it for me, so I'm not like a gazlan. And at that point, if someone were to break into the house and steal it, I would not be liable because I still retain the status of a paid guard. Did I do a no-no? Did I violate the halacha? Yes. But since there's no wear and tear on the book, it's no worse for the wear. And I'm still watching it faithfully. So then I will not be held liable if a mishap occurs that is not due to my negligence. That's the difference between whether you're a sholeach yad or a shoel shalom midat. They're two terms which have different halachic status. Okay. Now, he says,
Rabbi,
yes.
I wanted to ask you something with regard to this whole idea of midas sodom.
Please.
Is it not also a part of midas sodom where basically people would steal, but in such amounts, or you couldn't prove it and kind of get away with it? Or is that Noach time?
There is a medrash that says before the flood, people behaved in that kind of way, where they would take from others less than a shava pruta, small amounts for which there's no legal recourse against them. It's still called gezela if you steal from someone less than a shava pruta. It's just that it's not actionable gezela. So that's an illustration. The medrash is giving us an illustration of how people would find legal loopholes to exploit other people's property.
So the reason I'm asking you is, it's a little bit off topic, but it's kind of on this whole idea of gzela, midas dom, etc. I would argue we're living in a society in North America that is heading in that direction, where legally you can, like you have laws where basically are being put into place where you can kind of steal from others and have no consequence. I'll give you an example. It's from your home state in California, that there's a law on the books, with all this looting and all this stuff that went on over the last several months, that if you loot or if you steal under approximately $800, pretty much they'll drop the case. So what's happened is, basically prosecutors are not prosecuting such individuals. So my general question is,
you don't have to go to California for that. Yeah, I was just a victim of credit card fraud. I just discovered it Motzei Shabbos. It happens to me about once a year, once every 2 years, where I find out that someone has gotten hold of my credit card number, and it just started using it, and hundreds of dollars, and the credit card companies will essentially, the reason why they charge so many fees is because they need to cover the cost of paying for theft. It happens everywhere.
So my question for you, by the way, as a separate note, I have a patient of mine who's a lawyer for a credit card company that specifically deals with fraud. And he tells me, I always ask him because I find it fascinating that this goes on, that credit card companies write off millions and millions of dollars because they cannot prosecute, even if they, anyways, but my question is,
especially since many of them are offshore, guy from Russia comes,
So my question for you is as a society, when we're living in a society where we're either actively or passively condoning such behavior because we have governments that are not, being vigilant about this, what does that say for where we're headed?
Well, it's an interesting question. Is government to blame for the lawlessness that we're currently seeing? And it's a very complicated. I don't think that it's an easy question to answer. I think once governments abdicate their responsibility of enforcing the law, then the government is complicit in the promotion of lawlessness in the land. But when, so for example, I would agree with you that defunding the police, which contributes to lawlessness, is an abdication of governmental responsibility. But
Right.
but not
But
not going after petty theft and larceny like we used to in the old days may just be for economic reasons. The economy has changed in the world today. The global economy has changed. We are on the cusp of eliminating poverty, especially in outside of third world countries. Poverty is in the process of being eliminated in the Western world. And what that essentially means is that we're certainly, for example, hunger is all but eliminated in the Western world. And what that indicates is that, and they're even talking, there's even talk now that there are certain segments of society, because we have so much wealth, it may not be necessary for everyone to work in the future. Whether that's going to be healthy for society or not, I doubt that's a healthy phenomenon. But the fact of the matter is that there's more wealth in the world than is required for every single person to work. And as a result, I think society as a whole has made a decision that if people steal small amounts, it becomes not cost effective for us to go after them and to punitively discipline the criminals of society who are committing petty thievery, because it's easier just to give it to them than to go after them and punish them and incarcerate them. Incarcerating a criminal is very expensive, and it's actually cheaper, and to even litigate against a criminal is very expensive. And it's a strain on the court system, and it costs much more money to litigate an offense than many times than the offense has actually caused damage for. So that's the reason why we're seeing this in general in society. So I don't know whether we can necessarily always portray it in the sense of good and evil, but rather it's there are many times when governments make pragmatic decisions based on cost benefit analysis. You know what I'm saying? So I'm not here. I certainly sympathize with a more right-wing political view, myself personally. I do believe that part of the moral fiber of a society is to distinguish between right and wrong, and to punish wrong and to reward right. But at the same time, if there's an extreme cost involved, sometimes when you're running a government and you have a budget to balance, sometimes you can't get to everybody who needs to be punished properly.
But I think we both would agree that if this starts to become rampant in society, where people are aware that they can get away with, minor misdemeanors, it's not a good sign of what's to come in that society.
It doesn't bode well because it becomes a slippery slope. Yeah.
Correct. And this whole idea of potentially, let's say, if chas v'shalom, even though it's going that way, let's say this new government in the US, proceeds with such things as defunding the police, etc., it is obviously a sign of bad things to come.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, I would say it doesn't. It certainly does not bode well. I find it hard to believe that they will defund the police on any major scale.
Already in Minneapolis, Seattle, have voted to defund the police. Crime is rampant in both cities.
Well, listen, the pendulum swings constantly. You will see that they will vote out of office those politicians who are they perceive as being responsible for rampant crime, and eventually the pendulum will swing back in the other direction. I have full confidence in the democratic system. I mean, I shouldn't say full confidence. I have partial confidence.
I was going to say you shouldn't have full confidence because you have many million people who think very differently than we think.
Yes, it's true until it actually affects them, right? And so
yeah,
one of the problems of great wealth is that people are removed from the experience of being exploited, of being owned by other people. Because when you have wealth, you can afford security, you can take care of yourself. But once it hits you, then we typically see that when the very liberal people, once they become the victims of crime and hate and so forth, their political views start to change also.
Couldn't you argue, though, as well? I'm sorry to sound gloom and doom, but sometimes it's too late. We have, we have historical facts. For example, in Germany, when Hitler, Ymach Shemo, came to power, there were those who said, this is going to pass. Of course, people who don't think this way, even though they're a bunch of thugs, will vote them out of office. And we know what happened in history.
Yeah.
So I would argue that it's not always the case that there's an opportunity, to correct wrongs.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. When a politician comes forward with a book like Mein Kampf and singles out the Jews as a minority population worthy of persecution, then we'll know it's time for us to back up and leave. We'll know that.
But unfortunately, it's not always so clear. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
All I'm saying to you is that, for example, and we could argue about this, but for example, the left wing of the Democratic Party has a very communist socialist agenda that, the US could wake up in 6 months or a year and all of a sudden see it's not going to happen overnight, but there's a communist socialist agenda that is on the horizon.
Yes, and that's a much larger conversation. And I certainly hope that the Constitution of the United States protects the United States in 2020 or 2021 from becoming a socialist state. And on that, my friends, we've got a little bit.
We'll say amen.
We will say amen, and we will call it a day because I got to get ready for my next year.